putting it all together using best practices for grant success. If you are new to joining us today, even though this is our 9th webinar, we welcome you. A little bit about Grants Plus and why you should listen to me about this. Grants Plus is the nation's most trusted and experienced professional grant-seeking firm. That's in bold. Essentially, we are a nationwide firm that helps organizations get grant money, whether that is writing grants, researching, helping them make connections, strategy, et cetera, et cetera. And we are thrilled to have partnered with NCCER and all of its partner organizations for the past almost year now. You guys are all doing great work. NCCER is doing great stuff, and we are really happy to have had this partnership and help all of you advance your grant seeking. So for those of you who don't know our partnership, we've got a few benefits here. We've got some pre-vetted funding opportunities, which you had to scroll past to sign up for this webinar. So you have seen those. Those get updated regularly. We just added a few state and I think one federal earlier this week. We have drop-in office hours next week on the 21st at 1 o'clock Eastern. That is where, again, on that page that you signed up for this webinar, you can just go to there and there's a link. It'll be a Teams link, just like office hours for a teacher. Just drop in. You'll pop up on my Teams and we can chat for a minute if you've got just some quick questions. We also have one-on-one coaching sessions, which are a little more formal. Those are a half-hour coaching session where we can talk about anything that is vexing you about grants, whether that is getting started, going after a particular funder, et cetera. There's only 2 weeks of those left. Those end at the end of February. So if you'd like to do that, sign up. And also we've got a series of grant seeking guides that are on the same page where you signed up. If you go down to the bottom, those are just great one-pagers that you can use as a resource and especially help other people that you work with to kind of understand how grant seeking works. So those are a quality resource. I recommend downloading them. A few things for today. First of all, ask questions at any point. Please use the Q&A, not the chat, because the chat's hard to keep track of. And I'll have some time at the end too if you've got something. And today we are just going to talk about the key best practices. Very conveniently, there are 5 for grant seeking success and understanding what trends might impact that in 2023, because there are, as there have been for the past few years, some things going on. So first things very first, why grants matter. Why have we done this series? Why do I keep talking about grants? Why do we exist? Foundation grants are a growing piece of the philanthropic pie. It is that simple. If you look at the chart over to the side, foundations made almost 91 billion with a B in grants last year, and they represented about 20% of all philanthropy. And the really important part of this and the really important part of that graph and why I've got it over there is that you see that it used to be only a little bit of money. It was about 6% of total philanthropy in the 1980s. It's now about 20%. And when we get to the very end, we're going to talk about why that matters in our things to look out for in 2023. So why care about grants? Because there's money there. Foundations have to give away money every year. They're required by the IRS to give away 5% of their assets to their charitable purpose, and most really give closer to 7%. The other thing too is that everybody keeps talking about this coming recession that's just around the corner and has been for a year. We'll talk about this at the end too. Foundation giving is usually counter-cyclical. The point here is that foundations, unlike government grant programs, unlike individuals, already have the money that they're going to give you. The money they're going to give you next year is already sitting in a market somewhere, or sitting in an account, or if they're the worst foundation ever, sitting under their mattress. That money has already been earned. It already exists. It's invested so it can fluctuate a little, but a foundation is not going to find itself out of work and unable to make a donation next year. It has the money already. So that is key. Why care about government grants? Because government grants can be a large chunk of funding. And you'll see here, your average local grant is $71,000. Your average state grant is $165,000. Your average federal grant is $606,000. The average foundation grant is something like $7,000. So these are all significantly larger than the average foundation grant. The other thing too is that government grants often help with the country's most pressing issues. For those of you that were around in 2008, 2009 doing job training, you know there was a huge pile of federal money for job training then to get people back into jobs when the economy had crashed. Right now, there is ARPA funding to help with COVID recovery, and another thing we're going to talk about at the end. It's almost as if I've set this up to make you guys want to stay until the end. So let's talk about these 5 key best practices. And for those of you who've gone to all of the webinars, this may be a little bit of review, but these are really, if you learn nothing else from everything we've talked about, these are your 5 key takeaways. And number 1 is almost counterintuitive. It is to develop relationships with grant funders. A lot of people have this idea that grants is just, I write this really compelling proposal, I hand it in, and then I get money. And that can work. For those of you who attended, I think our first or second when we talked about that, that can work, and it's frustrating that it does, but it's not sustainable. So having relationships with funders are the foundation to everything you're doing. And I'm not just talking about foundation funders here. I'm not just talking about private funders, also government programs. Having relationships with the people who are running government programs can be very helpful because they allow for two-way communication. So you're not spending 6 hours writing a proposal that you send in and hope it gets funded. You're having a discussion beforehand about your work and how it fits with what that funder does. And does that funder support what you do? And does that funder also recognize that what you're doing supports what they want to see in the world? So you've got that real communication and can have all these discussions beforehand. They also create room for long-term strategy. Because when we're working with clients, there's often a focus on, I need this year's grant. We have a deadline coming up. We need to get that grant. And yeah, you need this year's grant because you've got bills to pay. But ideally, you are spending the time to develop that relationship to create a long-term relationship that leads to long-term strategy. You want your first grant from a funder to be the first of their next 10 grants, not the only grant that you get. So you want to make sure that you are continuing to develop a relationship, which you can see in this sort of clumsy graph here. We call it the turtle because it sort of looks like one, of this being a cycle. This is an ongoing thing. You have to have relationships that let you craft a long-term strategy, that let you know that a funder is going to be with you for a while. You don't want to invest a whole bunch of time and effort and write a proposal and get $50,000 this year that maybe you really need. I mean, who doesn't? But then it just leads to nothing else. You want to make sure that you are investing in getting a future grant while you're getting this one. You are laying the seeds by developing that relationship. That in turn makes your funding more dependable. What we saw with COVID, and this is getting farther and farther into the rear view, which I love, but what we saw with COVID was when so many organizations were facing, all of their funding being in danger, or, in the case of like museums or places that depend on people coming every day, just getting cut off. Those that had good relationships with their funders were the ones that got funded first because they were the name that the funder recognized. They were the number that the funder had programmed into their phone with a name on it and actually picked up. And some of those, in the best cases, we saw, especially from community foundations, that organizations were just calling up a funder and saying, hey, everything has just crashed. We are worried about making payroll next month. We don't want to lay off our entire staff. We need an emergency grant. And in some cases, they would send an email saying that and get the grant. So having a good relationship makes funding more dependable day to day. And also when things go wrong, makes it far more dependable, because that is going to be, when there's a glut of asks, the organizations where funders have a relationship are going to be the ones that get looked at first. That's just human nature. If nothing else, if none of this convinces you, it also saves you time and effort. If you have an honest relationship with a funder, and again, including government funders, though they're a little more cagey about this, a funder will just tell you, no, this isn't a good proposal. This isn't a good time. We're not looking at this right now. Or, yes, this is exactly what we want to fund. You should apply for the next proposal deadline, whatever that is. So even a little relationship, even the superficial one, helps you save time and effort and is worth your time to invest. If nothing else, just thinking of yourself, it will save you time. So the other thing too that we sort of talked about for a second on the emergency stuff is that relationships help you rise above the crowd. So relationships and talking about what your organization does and the impact it has, talking to funders about that lets you communicate the change that you make in the world a lot better than even the best written proposal. Again, because it's two-way, it lets them ask questions. It lets the funder, suss things out where they may want to go down a line of questioning that they may not in a proposal. And you're leaving them better informed by having a conversation, by having a relationship, by that funder knowing you, than again, having their entire relationship with you be a piece of paper or an electronic submission that you're sending them. Also, again, genuine conversations. So getting feedback about your programming, not even about a proposal, but having a funder, talking to a funder and having them give you feedback on how your programming fits with what they do, or talking about how you want to expand and does that fit with what the funder wants or what the funder is looking for, talking about any changes you're going to do and getting feedback. Honestly, you can get feedback from some funders that they have got the expertise in what you're doing and they can give you advice on what you should do. Also, again, discussing your proposals before submitting will let you position your proposal in the best way. I sort of touched on that, but you've got a funder who cares about kids, transition age adults, and seniors. And your proposal is going to deal with kids and transition age adults. So you're gonna be in a high school, and then, I can call them kids. I'm in my late 40s. Kids who are 18 to 25. You can talk to that funder and figure out if they would like a proposal that is just about the high school kids, that is just about the transition age kids, that's about both, whatever that is. The other thing too is that having a real relationship, for those of you who have sent in a grant proposal and gotten a decline letter where they didn't fund you, every one of them says some version of, thank you for your proposal. We were overwhelmed with proposals this time. We couldn't possibly fund everything that was asked for. Unfortunately, your proposal did not make it into our top priorities. Keep doing the great work you're doing. We really support it. You get sick of those letters quickly. And if you have, again, even just a little bit of a relationship with a funder where they know who you are, know what you do, you can get some real feedback on that. And you can find out if that is listen, we're never going to fund you because you're not close enough to what we care about, or if that is, yeah, all of our money was taken over by this capital request from somebody else, so apply for the next deadline and we'll probably fund you. So just again, it will save you time and it will have you make better proposals. The other nice thing too is that it levels out the power dynamics. And I know this is a thing for a lot of people who don't do fundraising full time and who kind of don't swim in these waters, is you don't want to feel like you're just, Oliver Twist begging for extra porridge from this funder. That is not, it's a really bad feeling. Nobody likes to beg. So you develop this relationship where you are leveling out those power dynamics and you're talking about what the funder wants to see happen in the world. And you're talking about what you are doing to help make changes in the world and help people live better lives. And then you're just two people working towards a better goal. They want people to have great careers. You want people to have great careers. Awesome. Let's work together. A whole different dynamic. Also, the funder becomes your partner. So that keeps them from just being an ATM and just handing out money, but lets them be a real thought partner who may have potentially very valuable input. For those of you who are looking to national funders, they're going to see what has worked and hasn't worked in lots of places and may have some really valuable feedback for you on your programming, not just your proposal and how you're approaching them, but on your proposal itself. Also, efficiency, I already touched on that. I'm going to skip over that because we talked about that, but really a quick conversation, even the most superficial relationship, can help you be a lot more efficient. So keep that in mind. Next best practice, which I touched on a little bit, is focus on the funder's mission and priorities. So grant makers, and this is private foundations, this is corporate foundations, this is government, They seek to address some problem or create some change in the world. They're not just handing out money for fun. They want something to happen. So they make grants to fund organizations to do the work to make the change. And that can sometimes be really specific. Like a government grant program will often have, especially federal, it's going to have 10 required outcomes that you have to do A, B, C, and then you expect to see in your evaluation that everyone will have a job, knowledge levels will have gone up whatever percent. So it can be that level where you know exactly if you're a fit or not. But then there's also so many community foundations that just do things like they want to create a stronger community in their city, where you've got to really kind of talk to them about what you're doing and how you're doing that. So being able to target what you are doing to what that funder wants to see is critical and will make you stand out. You have to show the grant maker that you're doing this and make it obvious. Don't let them read between the lines. Don't think, well, they support workforce development and we do workforce development, so clearly we're a fit. Say, you support workforce development, we support workforce development. And you can do this by repeating their priorities. If you look at the quote, you just repeat what the foundation believes or what the foundation wants. You can even actually use their own words. And we do this a lot where, the example here, every teen should leave high school prepared for college or a career. We do a lot where we will just write a proposal and we just drop that funder's language in from their website right there. So it is real obvious this does what they want to do. The good news is for all of you is that funders do care about the work you do and you are advancing things that funders care about. So right now, a lot of funders who are doing workforce development are sick of funding GEDs that get people jobs at McDonald's. They're looking to fund things that get people into a livable wage and sustainable careers. Obviously, getting people into these things that don't require college and don't require going into debt is big right now. A lot of them too, a lot of funders who care about workforce development want to be able to see a career pathway. So they want to work with organizations that will set people in careers, whereas I earn this certification, I work for 2 years, I earn this certification, I work for 3 more years, I earn this certification, and I get raises throughout, which should sound very familiar to most of you. And the other thing too is a lot of funders, especially community foundations, are interested just in economic development and building our communities. And your work and the people you serve is literally building our communities. And I think you've got a good opportunity to talk to funders about that, where a person working for a foundation is not necessarily going to use a food bank, but a person working for a foundation is going to use a sink and a road and lives in a building and enjoys electricity, all of that. So you've got some opportunities to tie what you do into their lives too. So focus on the impact that you have on your community and those who live in it. You're not talking about, yes, we do workforce development and end it at that. You are talking about, we provide opportunities for great careers. We provide people life-changing opportunities to work in the trades, whatever that is, focusing on that. The other thing too is that funders care about the populations you serve. So again, right now, writ large across funders, there's a lot of concern about youth transitioning to careers because there is sort of this two-way street of I'm either going to work at McDonald's or I'm going to go massively into debt for college. And you are a third path out of that. You are a sustainable wages again. So those of you who have programs where you are working with internships, where you're working with apprentices, you're getting kids from high school to look into craft careers to then go into that career, that is a big focus for funders right now. Also, adults seeking sustainable employment. So that can either be second career or that can be, an adult who has gotten to 30 working terrible minimum wage jobs, now has 2 kids and needs something to change. And in both of those, you're sort of getting people out of the stream of need. And I don't think funders really look at it this way, and I wouldn't necessarily say it this way to them, but a lot of what your work does is make it so that people don't need the foundation anymore. They don't need social services anymore. You are getting them to be self-sufficient, and that is an attractive thing for a lot of funders, whether they want to phrase it that way or not. The other thing too is, so I've got it here as populations not traditionally represented in craft careers, but anything you are doing to open new pathways to people is going to be big for funders right now, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But again, much like you're talking about what you do in the community, focusing on the impact you have on lives can be very helpful when talking with funders, because they're looking at things as what is going to change in the world, not necessarily how are you doing it or what are you doing to make that happen, but that you are. So our third thing here, which is a little bit all-encompassing, is make sure that your programs are funder friendly and how you talk about your programs are funder friendly. Excuse me for 1 second. So what do we mean by that? So a funder-friendly program has a few things happening. It is addressing an urgent need in a defined population, because again, there's always more need than there is money. So you want to be talking about how you are taking care of a specific population with an urgent need. It should have clear goals and outcomes that address this need, so you're able to talk about, and here's what we're going to do to address this. So in your case, it is, there are people working these terrible jobs while at the same time we have all these great jobs that are open. There's your urgent thing, and you can talk about your populations. A lot of you serve specific populations. Here are our clear goals that are going to do that. We're going to give them an apprenticeship. We're going to give them training. We're going to pay for their tools. We're going to land them in a job. You guys are sort of on easy mode for a lot of this. Having activities that produce these outcomes. So we're going to have a class, we're going to have a online class for the basics. We're going to have a virtual reality for some of this, and we're going to have lab time every Saturday, whatever that is. So having the activities that will lead to those outcomes. That you can evaluate your progress and show that you are doing what you said you were going to do and that you're being successful. And that you have a complete balanced budget. So we're going to get into these really quickly. So the urgent need in a defined population, your request should address something that you know exists. So there's a problem. And again, your problem is there are all these openings in craft careers, and there are all these people who our potential workforce who needs to get trained, who could be in sustainable careers but aren't. So again, you've got that. It needs to be something that's backed up with statistics and not just an idea. You also should be able to talk about, without timely intervention, there will be negative consequences. So without our help, these people are going to continue working these terrible jobs. Kids are going to transition into a career at McDonald's and make $9 an hour and never be sustainable. Whatever that is, you've got great answers. And that your work focuses on the population that specifically has that need. So again, for you, a lot of that is, transition age kids who don't know what they want to do with their life. People who've never had the opportunity for a craft career before, but could be brought into it and be great workers and have great lives. All of those that you're already doing. So you've kind of already got this. You know your urgent need, you know your population. Just make sure you're telling the funder about it. So that, I think, you're mostly covered on. Then having goals and outcomes that address that need. So goals are a long-term thing. And that's that classical moving the needle, I will say in air quotes. This is not something you're going to solve in 1 year or possibly one lifetime. So that is something, and I'm taking the example of an electrician training program. Anyone interested in becoming an electrician can start a career. You might get close to that, but that's probably not going to happen exactly in anyone's lifetime. So your outcomes are things that help that happen. So you want anybody who wants to be an electrician can have that career. So what are you going to do about it? You are going to have 100 students that graduate your program with their electrician certification and can move into jobs. So that's really, the outcome is sort of, with this grant money, we are going to. That's what's going to come of this grant money that helps take a chunk out of this long-term goal and helps us move towards that. Then you have your objectives. And again, funders are going to ask about all of these. They're going to ask for your goal, they're going to ask for your outcome, and then they're going to ask for your objectives. And these are those real short-term, some people call these outputs. the short-term things that you are going to do that are going to lead to this other stuff happening. So in this case, we're going to recruit high school seniors, we're going to provide instructions, and we expect that 90% of students are going to complete the course. So those are those short-term, easily measurable objectives, should always be measurable, easily measurable things that you can do, that you're going to do with the grant money, that will help lead to the outcome, that will eventually help lead to the goal. And there are a lot of funders that very explicitly will say, tell us your goal, tell us the outcomes, and then tell us the activities that you're doing towards this. Some of them make you do a logic model. Some of them will make you just, for each goal, list 2 objectives. For each objective, list 3 activities, up to 3 activities, whatever that is. Some are very literal about this. So the more you have in your head how your work is going to roll up towards this big goal, the easier it's going to be for you to share your vision with funders and to write proposals, because you will be asked. You also then obviously need activities that are going to make that happen. And again, for a lot of you, this is not going to be abstract. I always use the example of, if you've got a program whose goal is going to help kids be better at math, and one of your activity is going to be, we're going to have a music program. You have to explain how that relates to math, and I know it does somehow, but you have to explain that. For you guys, it's a little more obvious, and the connection is there. So you want to make sure that everything you are doing is clearly and logically laid out. We're going to recruit high school kids. We're going to bring them into our apprenticeship program after their senior year. We expect that after they complete this course, they're going to start a job and then move into our next program within 1 year, whatever that is. So clearly and logically laying that out. Like I said, making sure that a layperson who's not working in what you do can understand that those activities will produce that outcome. That you have the activities are following the current best practices in your field, or the current state of the art. For example, having your animations come up correctly, so that you're not reinventing the wheel. Funders don't necessarily want to pay for reinventing the wheel. They want to pay for things that have been shown to be successful elsewhere. So being able to show that your activities are the best practices in what you're doing. One of the things that comes to my mind, for a lot of you have talked about doing these augmented reality, virtual reality, allowing people to train before they actually get a hold of the welder that's as hot as the sun, that kind of stuff. Being sure that you're explaining quickly that these activities, what we're doing here, this is what is expected, this is the state of the art. The literature backs this up, our experience backs this up, whatever. And also demonstrating that you have the resources to do this. And that can be, you've got the lab space, you've got staff that knows what they're doing, you've got an instructor who's been a welder for 50 years, whatever that is. So showing that you've got qualified people, showing that you've got the infrastructure, or that you have access. So maybe you don't, but you've got a partner who does. You have an agreement with ABC Electrical Contracting to use their space when they're not there on Sunday. So you're going to have your labs on Sunday, whatever that is. So either you have got it on hand or can get it easily and have an agreement. And by the way, if you have an agreement with somebody else, you've got to generally be able to back that up with a letter in a grant. Funders don't want to see that you just, you think we're going to partner with blah, 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 but we'll ask them once we get the money. They want to see that you've got that in place. So again, following just sort of this logical thing. You've got this need. You've got a goal to help that need. You're going to have some outcomes that advance that goal. You're going to have activities that support those outcomes. All of this follows logically. That's why I have that lovely pyramid graph there. The other fun thing for this too is having a complete balanced budget. And that should tell the same stories in numbers that the narrative tells in words. Especially with larger foundations that have a board of volunteers that do the analysis, inevitably someone is a lawyer or an accountant that flips to the budget first. They may not even read the narrative. They may just see job training, 100 people, they flip to the budget, and they're going to use their thoughts of what is a logical budget for training 100 people in welding or whatever it is. So make sure that for that person, the budget is telling that same story. So everything that you have in the narrative should be in the budget. So if you're talking about, we're going to have 2 instructors, both of their funding should be in the program budget. You're going to talk about, we're going to use 15 virtual welding machines that we're renting from Lincoln Electric. I don't know if that's real. Better have that rental fee in the budget. We're going to use the space at the local union hall, whatever that is that we're going to rent from them. Better have that rent in the budget. Making sure that, you know, we're going to buy tools for all of our students when they graduate the program, making sure that's there. So being able to show in your numbers, in your budget, that everything that you have just talked about can happen. The other thing too is to make sure that your budget is in the Goldilocks zone. So it's got to be just right. And that not to put pressure on anyone, but that means that it should be large enough to produce the promised outcomes, but small enough to be efficient. And if you need the Cadillac, ask for the Cadillac. Especially in your case, if every one of your graduates is going to be expected to know how to use some $60,000 piece of machinery, and the only way you can teach them is to have that $60,000 piece of machinery, you're going to have to put that $60,000 piece of machinery in your budget. Because as much as funders want to be efficient, as much as there's limited funding, what they really don't want to do is send good money after bad. They want to make sure that you're going to be successful, and they would rather pay $100,000 to have you be successful than pay $50,000 to have you fail. And a bad budget will be really obvious that you are not in that Goldilocks zone. You know, you're going to talk about how you need 3 experienced instructors, and your budget showing that you're going to pay them $8 an hour each. I don't think you're going to find experienced instructors for $8 an hour each. You're going to talk about how you're training on state-of-the-art equipment, and you've got $5,000 in the budget for a 3 generations ago thing. You know, whatever that is. I'm using sort of extreme examples, but anybody who's good at this, anybody who's read a bunch of proposals will be able to spot that fairly quickly. So you've got to make sure that you have enough funding in there to do what needs to get done. The other thing too is the funder may not necessarily be paying for all of this. This might be a $500,000 program that you're asking for $50,000 towards. So it's not like, you know, you've got a small funder, you've got to have a small budget. You need to have a program budget that's reflective of everything. And then a smaller funder takes a smaller chunk of it, a bigger funder takes a bigger chunk of it, et cetera. So all that is a lot of words to say, make sure whatever you need to be successful is actually in the budget. The other thing too is to make sure that you have got a plan for income. So your income and expenses should be balanced. There is, well, there's probably more worse, but there are few things worse in a budget where you've got a $500,000 program. You're asking a funder for $50,000, so you put their $50,000 and the income is hopeful, and then you have no idea how you're going to raise the rest. You can't show the rest of it. So making sure that you are showing the funder that you have got a plan to raise the money that you need to make things happen. Because again, they want to make sure that they are investing wisely, that they are spending good money. So that might be, you know, $500,000 program. You're going to them for 50, you're going to another corporation for 100, you've already gotten another grant for 70, whatever that is. Make sure you're showing all of that in the budget. Make sure you're showing that there's a plan to get this, and you're not just hoping and praying. And one of the questions we actually get a lot around this is, well, what if we don't know? What if we're going to do A, B, or C depending on how much money comes in? I would say generally you want to go for whatever you want to do. So if your reality is you're planning to serve 100 people, but you can back that down to 50 if you only get half the funding, which I realize is not usually, the math doesn't usually work that way. Put in for the 100. That maybe make a note somewhere that says, you know, half of this funding we're not sure of. If we don't get it, we will start this program with 50 and continue to fundraise until we can get up to 100, whatever that is. But again, making the budget reflect what you want to do and making sure everything is in there is the key part. I think I've said that enough now. The other thing, which is a little bit challenging, but not necessarily for you guys, is making your proposals interesting to read. So this is important because whatever, and we'll talk about this at the end, whatever funder you are going to, you are probably not the only proposal that they are reading. Odds are they're going to read, if they fund workforce development, odds are they're going to read 10 different people's ideas on workforce development and have to decide which 6 they're going to fund. And you want to make sure that yours is the memorable one, that yours is easily understandable, that everything we just talked about is laid out and they can logically see how things are going to happen, and that it sticks in their head. So there's a few things with that. So grants need data for sure. Everything we just talked about is data. What population are you serving? What are you going to actually do? What are the outcomes? How many people are going to participate? How do you know if you're being successful? All of that stuff. That stuff is all important. Funders love this. Funders, especially larger funders, often to their detriment, want the numbers so that they can, at the end of the year, roll up in their big spreadsheet and say, our foundation has helped 60,000 people find jobs. They want that stuff. Sometimes that's all they care about, and that's not a great situation. But they've got to have that. But that's not interesting. I'm sort of a numbers person, and data doesn't stick in my head unless it's something insane, unless it's like 98% of the population is in danger of losing their job. That might stick. But what does actually stick is making that stuff come alive. So grant makers absolutely want that data to feed their metrics, like I said, but they need to connect with who you serve and what you do to remember you. And this is, I'm sure you've all heard show, don't tell, which is weird to talk about when you're writing a grant, but you can do that. So we go about that in a couple ways. My favorite one is using a client story to personalize a larger point. So this is where you're going to serve 300 people of various things, but you're able to focus in on a story of one student who kind of epitomizes what you're doing. So this person came to you after a frustrating career that they didn't like, or couldn't get raises, couldn't get promotions, whatever that is. They came to you, they were a great student, they did everything well, they got a great job after, they've advanced, et cetera, and now are doing fine. That's sort of an arc that you can use that personalizes all of this, that goes from workforce development for 100 people to do all that. I mean, again, all that's important, but then personalizing that, being able to show the impact that you made on one life, that then transitions out to, and like Matt's story, 99 other people every year have a transition like that in their lives. But it makes it stick. It makes you remember. You remember a story about a person. You don't remember necessarily, a whole bunch of facts and figures. So you want to create a narrative, not just a collection of facts. You want to be able to have an arc. You want to be able to talk about how, you know the need because clients come to you frustrated about their inability to make enough money to live on. And that arc goes through all of your training, all of your services, and then ends with a sustainable career where they're getting raises, they're advancing, et cetera. So anytime you can in a proposal, when you're talking to a funder, creating that arc, showing that change on top of the data is great and is going to make that stay in their mind. The other thing on keeping this interesting and making things come alive is using non-words, using graphs, using charts, using pictures, using call-out boxes. And this is getting harder and harder to do as funders have online proposals and want you to say in 500 characters how you're going to change the lives of 100 people. But where you can, doing this stuff makes a difference. It makes it easier for them to digest things. It's easier to remember a graph going up. If I were to ask you all about, what have foundations done for the past 40 years, you'd say go up. You wouldn't be able to tell me the numbers from the slide we looked at 30 minutes ago. So doing all of that makes you more memorable, makes you more easy to understand. So wherever you can do that, make yourselves interesting. So our last best practice is kind of a newer thing for a lot of organizations and a lot of funders, And that is being able to demonstrate how you are advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I have good news for you. All of you are doing this every day. So funders care about DEI, and coincidentally, that a lot of that came up in 2020. A lot of this had been a nice thing that funders had talked about, but not actually acted on until things sort of exploded that summer. So funders have really, a lot of funders have really become committed to focusing on creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive place for us to live in. So you find this in different ways. Some funders want you to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, or a non-discrimination statement, things like that for your organization, and will require you to attach that. Some will have expectations of board diversity. And this one gets tricky because it far too often will end up just as simple math of like, is your board all not white male? Okay. Ideally, what you're doing is having a board that represents the people you serve, with different expertise, but having your organization, having people who make decisions about your organization represent more than just people who look like me is kind of the key. It's having people who have gone through your programming, having people who are hiring your people, having people who have experienced not having a great job and not having a good one, things like that, having some diversity there. And again, each funder kind of approaches that differently, but there is sort of an expectation that the people making decisions about your organization are not just the usual collection. 20, 30 years ago, everybody's board was, lawyers, accountants, and rich people. And they're looking to move beyond that now. Also, making sure that you are tracking services to traditionally underserved communities. So this comes up, the example I use a lot is this comes up in museums, because museums for years have had this sense that lower income people, people of color, people without a ton of education are not welcome there. And museums have sort of been dealing with this forever, to varying degrees of effectiveness. And with the DEI thing has also been just, okay, tell us how you are for real going out and bringing in people, not just saying, hey, come, but how you are bringing in people who have traditionally been underserved by whatever you do. And that also is incorporating new communities into your work. And I think for a lot of you, those are sort of similar. Again, it's not getting blue collar white guys exclusively into craft careers, but incorporating in those new communities and being able to say, these are new people we're bringing in, these are new communities, we are helping spread equity, etc. So like I said, you're already doing this. I don't know a better word, that's why I left it in quotes. You're already doing DEI. Most of you are working to bring people into careers that does not look like the workforce did 20 years ago. So make sure you're highlighting that. Talk about how you're doing outreach to different populations. So there's your diversity and inclusion. Talk about how you're reaching out to students who don't necessarily want to go to college, and you are essentially diverting them from minimum wage and dead-end jobs that they're never going to be able to be sustainable in their life. Talk about how you're doing that. Again, diversity and inclusion. And talk about how this is really what you're doing is that economic development and economic empowerment work. Again, you are helping people who are not going to college for whatever reason, or who've gone to college and have a philosophy degree and that's not working out for them. You are providing economic empowerment for people. You are creating equity. You are helping people of different, different colors, different nationalities, different genders. You are helping them have great jobs. So you're doing this economic empowerment. You are helping with equity. So all of you are already doing this. You may have to find ways that a funder wants to see it discussed because they've got their own vision of it, but you're already doing the work. So for the most part, you're all in very good shape. So let's take a second here and talk about, we've got about 15 minutes left here, talk about what grant seeking looks like in 2023, because it does not look like it did in 2020 or 2019. Those are two very different years. So a few things to be aware of. So first of all, we have what I'm calling a government funding flux. So a couple of years ago, the government had the American Rescue Plan money that they didn't even know what to do with. They were spending it however they could. That funding is starting to wind down, and a lot of organizations that we work with are now searching for replacement funding. So that actually has a couple impacts. They're also looking for new funding. You're also looking for new funding. So be aware there might be some more competition out there, but infrastructure spending is continuing. So I know a lot of this is filtering down to state level, and I don't have necessarily a great grasp of all the tiny details about it, but there's 55 billion sitting out there for Build Back Better. And we're going to need people to do all that infrastructure work. The current workforce, I don't think, is going to be addressing that. And hey, you all do job training. So there is probably going to be some state and local opportunities in there. If nothing else, the only impact is downstream of more craft jobs that you need to fill. So there's more need for your services and more need for you, and that bolsters your case for funding. So the flip side that I talked about of the foundations going up, I told you we would talk about this later, is that there are fewer individual donors. And I know from talking with a lot of you, a lot of you have gotten by on individual and corporate donations. So actually the total amount of donations by individuals continues to increase. It's going up. It's going up at 4.7% total from individuals. The total amount given went up in 2022, except the number of people actually doing that continues to decrease. So that's down 7%. So you have fewer donors making larger donations, which leads us away from the donations are shifting towards more wealthy individuals. If you know those individuals, if those individuals are working with you, great, carry on. But there are going to be a lot fewer $25 donations and a lot more $25,000 donations, except those $25,000 donations are harder to get. This means there's going to be more competition. It's going to impact all organizations. Larger donors are going to be asked to do more because right now, again, if I'm a high wealth individual and I'm making $25,000 gifts, I'm making a lot fewer of those than I would be if I was making small gifts. So there's going to be, again, bigger chunks of money, but fewer of them, and larger donors are going to be asked to do more that they may not necessarily be able to. And this also means there's going to be more competition. So there's going to be more competition for grants to replace those individual donations. Because again, especially I talked about during times when the market is down, people go to foundations because their individuals are drying up, which leads me to my next point. 2023, we are still dealing with market uncertainty. This affects individuals a lot. People tend to draw back on giving if they think the economy is going to tank soon. If they think that they're not going to be in good financial shape in 6 months, they may not give today. They want to squirrel that away, and I get it. But the other thing is that foundations have most of their assets in financial markets. They've all got various different risks, and nobody's going to lose it all on one stock. But foundation assets were down by a bunch of different estimates, but between 15 and 28% in 2022. But the 3-year average is still positive, and that's important because most foundations use a 36-month window. So when they're calculating their assets that they have to give 5% of, they use this 3-year window. They average out their assets for those full 3 years, and they give based on that. And that helps kind of narrow down some of the spikes and take the edges off. If the market is super up, they've still got a couple quarters of regular market over here. They're going to temper that a little bit. And same with if it goes down. So that's good. Overall, it's still positive, but foundation money did not grow in 2022, and it was probably down by most of these estimates. So again, more competition and now less money. That is going to impact everyone. So foundations may be forced to pull back, especially because if this continues on, and it looks like it's not, but if this continues on into 2023, if they've got more than a couple quarters of this 3-year that's down, foundations may have to pull back combining with other sources being in decline. So you get sort of a perfect storm of the markets tank badly. Foundations have to pull back a little bit, and individuals are frightened and can't make gifts in general. Having said that, again, foundations already have the money today that they're going to give you next year. So it's not going to be a steep decline. But again, you will see, more competition for less money, fewer grants. It gets tougher out there. So start your relationships with funders now and get on that. The last thing I'm going to leave with that's a trend is donor advised funds. So for those of you who don't know about them, donor advised funds are kind of like foundations. That they're like if a foundation and a bank account had a weird baby. So a donor advised fund is generally held either by a community foundation or by a financial institution. And if I'm a very wealthy person, I've had a great year, I create a donor advised fund. I donate my money to it this year. So I put 20 million in it this year. I take the tax break on that 20 million that I gave to that donor advised fund fully. It's like I gave 20 million in charity. The money sits in that donor advised fund and I disperse it. So a lot of people, especially we're seeing this with tech funders, a lot of people who would have set up a small family foundation, 30 years ago, are now doing a donor advised fund. And one of the things that is worrisome about that is that there are no requirements for disbursement. So is that if a foundation's got, $10 million, let's make this easy. If a foundation has $20 million in its bank account, it's got to give away $5 million. No, it's got to give away $1 million every year. It's got to give away 5%. So there has to be some grants being made every year. A donor advised fund, you can put your money in it. You can make all your grants in year one and be done. You cannot make a grant for 10 years, then make them all, later on. There is no requirement on that. So it's sort of disruptive to the overall flow of philanthropy coming into our organizations. I will say donor advised funds have generally given more than that 5% anyway. It's generally been okay, but there's no guarantee that it will be in the future. And that giving is on the rise. You can look at the numbers here. They made $45 billion in grants in 2021. That is about half of what foundations made. And it has increased 23% over the last 5 years. Most of that was in the past 2. So it is the little graph there on the right is about right. And there are $234 billion with a B sitting in donor advised funds right now. Having said that, there's something like, I forget, I think it's about $3 trillion or more sitting. Well, it will do 400 billion times 20 is what you've got. It's more than, I'm not going to try to do the math live, but there's trillions of dollars in foundation money still. So donor advised funds are still a small part of that, but they're growing. They also give like individuals. They don't have an application process generally. You generally have to know someone. They're not generally public. So they are a little bit scary for those of us who are getting a lot of funding through grants. We want to make sure, especially that you pay attention to community foundations who often have staff that can match make between the donor advised funds that they hold and your organization. So again, back to relationships. Have relationships with your local community foundation because they hold a lot of this money. So having said all of that, so your 2023 trends are, looking okay. We're okay, just some things to watch out for. I am going to see, I don't see any questions, but while I'm looking here, I'm just going to launch a quick poll to rate today's webinar. And I say on here, don't worry, we won't take it personally. Give us an honest rating here. And then we will hopefully talk to some of you in office hours, hopefully talk to some of you in coaching. And I hope that you go to the site, go back the page where you signed up here, go back, explore the resources that are available. If you haven't, sign up for a coaching session. And then my contact info is up here if you'd like to connect. Thank you to all of you who have attended today and throughout our run here. It has been a privilege to do all these. I have met some great folks. Will these webinars be available forever? Just came up on the Q&A. Jennifer, they will be, just not sure exactly how. And NCCER's marketing is on here. I don't know if they want to chime in. Right now, they are hosted on the Grants Plus site. Once this partnership comes to a close, they will end up being hosted by NCCER. NCCER is getting a new website, so I'm just not sure exactly what that will look like. But you will have access to them somehow. So they're not disappearing. Good question. All right, well, with that, thank you, everyone. I am going to close this down here. Thank you very much for joining, and thanks for all the great work you're doing in the community.